That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast at the intersection of faith and fear, where every week we discuss what scares us in order to find what saves us. This is the fear of God. Speaking to you right now is one of your hosts, Nathan Rouse, and typically with me is longtime pal and fellow co-host Reed Lackey. And guys, he was here a minute ago, but he said something about needing to go hunt for his ball of magical cat fur, which, what? I don't know, but I'm sure something important is happening, and he'll, fill us in when he gets back. When hopefully he'll be back. While he tends to that, allow me to welcome you back to our current overarching series, In the Morning. This phase dubbed Remnant. We began this series, a corporate discussion of learning to lose, with Infinity War, and followed it with a ghost story, then The Changeling, last week, Stir of Echoes. Those last two were with friends Bill Oberst Jr. and Noel Manning, and Infinity War with friend of the fog, Ian Olsen. This week, we'll be looking at the film Under the Shadow, and our conversation will start once more backboned by a TV guidepost featuring HBO's The Leftovers. But I'm getting ahead of myself because here at The Fear of God, we explore, we don't explain, except for right now when I explain that you can find The Fear of God at your nearest podcast platform of choice, and also now on YouTube. That's right. We finally made it. We're on the small screen, sort of. Come find us on YouTube. If you consume podcasts there, as I understand some people do, you can find us there. We're pretty much caught up, except for some that we still need to excise illegal material on. You can also find us on the web at thefearofgodpodcast.com, wherein you will find episode archives and merch, which include things like cell phone cases, t-shirts, campaign buttons, magnets, pillows. Read, you're are you? Oh. That is a ball of magical cat fur, if ever one existed. He's not even mic'd. Oh, God. Jeez. Only on YouTube, everyone. Only on YouTube did you get that glorious
Did you even know what was happening?
Reed Lackey. Reed, welcome back, buddy. You and your pal there.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's fun times to be here. Yeah. So that was my own version of Camilla over there. Is my my safe doll.
I get it.
Oh,
It is,
keep up. Did you watch the material that we cover?
It watched me, man. I don't know this one. Now, Riri, last week we talked about Stir of Echoes, and we had a good time with old Noel Manning.
That was fun. I enjoyed that.
We met him at the movies in the same way he did us. We've also, Riri, got a new bit. We got a new bit. It's like a new thing, a little thing we're giving to the people. The listeners responded last week, and we want to remind them of our new call to action section. So speaking of pals, why don't you bring in our pal who joins us for this new little call to action segment?
All right. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Beetlejuice.
Job. Let's see, business section. Ooh la la, what do we got here?
Okay. All right. Here we are. So calls to action, not call to actions. Calls to action? It's like inspectors general.
You're overthinking.
Mothers-in-law. Call to action number 1. We want your email. We are going to send you a Fear of God sticker designed by Jacob Hunt of the It's Alive art from our very first art. We're going to send you a free sticker. All we want in return is your email address. We are trying to expand the fog footprint, and we need your email address to do that. So go to the website, front page, it says subscribe, put your email address in there, hit the enter button or whatever the button that submits it is right there. I'm not looking at it. And that's awesome. If you've already submitted, we're going to be reaching out to you to be able to get your mailing address so we can send you your lovely sticker. That's exciting, Reed.
I'm very excited about that. All right, so that's call to action number 1. Call to action number 2. We need you because this is our penultimate episode of our series #In the Morning, the sub-series #Remnant, the sub-series of all the sub-series. So yeah, we are going to be tagging back into the much more direct 2020, where we are going to be counting down your favorite horror films of every year from the 2000s. But we need your votes. Some people have already voted, but I feel like not everybody has had a chance to go. So please go and vote in the 2009 and 2010 surveys. You can do that by going to fearofgodpodcast.com, clicking the banner at the top. That will take you to the surveys. Cast your vote for your favorite horror films of 2009 and 2010, which we will be counting down in your top 10 in an episode in just a couple of weeks. So this is essentially
That's wild.
Your last week to do that. So please go. We will be closing the voting as of our next week's episode. So please go cast your votes for that for your favorite horror films of 2009 and 2010. And yeah, that's very exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
Subscribe. Give us your email. We'll give you a sticker. Vote. Yes. It is your obligation, if nothing else. I'm about to raise the game on this one, Riri. This is just real time game raising. I know, me too. So, what you're watching? We love what you're watching around here. Shout outs once more, 2 episodes in a row. You guys are amazing. Asia and J. Mark Schwarzentruber. Good Lord, I hope I got that right. So, you guys inspired this. So thank you, and you're welcome. And what we want, listeners, viewers, we want you guys to provide the what you're watching. You know the drill, and if you don't, Reed's about to tell you how it goes.
What you watching? What you reading? What you listening to?
Sure, whatever. So we want you to record, use a voice memo, whatever. Record yourself, record people in your household, keep a social distance, might not be able to pick up the recording as well. So people close to you, your dog, whatever, voice memo it, email it to us at fearofgodpodcast.com. We are going to use you guys. What? What's so funny?
They're not our dogs. That's just all.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Wow. So yes, we are. Please email those to us at fearofgodpodcast.com. How I am going to raise this game right now is, guys, we're on YouTube now. We're doing video versions of these podcasts now. If you want to film yourself, your peers, you and your spouse, you and your animal singing what you're watching, what you're reading, what you're listening to, we'll figure out a way to throw it into the video version too. Primary is the audio. Feel free to throw the video at us too. Same way, fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. So
very exciting.
Email for sticker, vote, record audio and or video of singing what you're watching, and we're going to throw it in there. What's the last, Reed?
All right, so the last one, we have just announced last week the very first Fear of God book club.
It's exciting.
It is happening. We have our very first entry coming up in just a few weeks. In just about a month's time, we are going to be tagging in on in preparation for HBO's upcoming show Lovecraft Country. We're going to be having a conversation with the author of the novel Lovecraft Country, Matt Ruff. Again, thank you to Blake Collier for introducing us to him and for his graciousness to come on to the show. So we're going to be having that conversation. We want you to have as much time as possible to be able to acquire a copy of the book, either through your local library or through any of the various means that you have to purchase it, and be able to read it before that conversation so you can be ready and well informed for that. But I will again emphasize, support your local library, because if you will share our show or an episode for our show, or something about our show, your thoughts, anything. Yes, if you will share our show or any of its related content to your social media platforms and tag us in it, because we won't know you've shared it if you don't tag us. So share it, tag us in it, and you will be automatically entered into a drawing for a chance at an autographed copy of Matt Ruff's Lovecraft Country. So yes, it's very exciting. All of this.
It's very exciting. That's really awesome. So emails for stickers. Send us your email via the front page of the website. Vote. Record yourself and your peers and whoever singing what you're watching, reading, listening to. Go back and listen to any of our episodes of the last 2 years, basically, to get the tune. That if Reed didn't help us there, and read Lovecraft Country. And on top of reading Lovecraft, share, guys. Listen, we are Reed and I are thrilled about the energy of the show and think some of you guys are too, and want to be able to grow that footprint even farther and farther. It doesn't matter. It does matter. I'm just not going to spend the time to wonder about it, so that in this moment doesn't matter. But
don't get existential.
I know. I'm just trying to say words matter. So share your thoughts, share an episode, share something about the show so that we get more eyes. Those shares, if we are tagged in them on your socials, enter you into an opportunity to win an autographed copy of Lovecraft Country by its author, Matt Ruff, who will be on the show.
Absolutely.
And that, thank you, our friend, Beetlejuice.
It's showtime.
Indeed it is, sir. Okay,
call to actions.
Here's what we're going to be doing next. Yes, those were their call to actions. We've segmented this out into this little business section, business time. So now
business time.
It is business time, but now it is time for something even better. Are you ready, Nathan?
Ready.
Are you ready? Okay.
Well, no, really, nothing can make you ready for this show.
Not for this one. Not for this one. But in the spirit of that, welcome to another edition of #TV Guideposts, where we're going to be diving into episodes 7 and 8 of season 1 of HBO's The Leftovers. I'm wondering how many possessives I can include in this little introduction. We're going to be exploring the episodes Solace for Tired Feet and the much shorter named Cairo. Not the Cairo syrup, but as in the
or Cairo, Egypt.
Or Cairo, Egypt, but a place, I don't know what that voice was, but I'm here to tell you about the episodes from The Leftovers. Please.
And we're back. So episode 7.
I love how the TV Guidepost intro, it's like it's getting more and more meta as it goes along. It's like you just now you really are picturing not the bygone days of ethereal piano music overlaying, some meditative voice. Now it's just people hovering around a microphone and trying to use that microphone for whatever is on their mind. Anyway, so yes.
Solace for Tired Feet, episode 7. So I'm going to throw something at you here. It's nothing profound, but just an interesting observation. Sure. Overall, none of the teenager storyline stuff is great or stands out in a real profound way in the greater context of the show. But I really do love the inventiveness that they execute on the concept of the sudden departure. And what I mean by that is the prank, which is morbid, but the refrigerator prank that happens,
of course,
prank is the wrong way, but the sort of challenge, the truth or dare type of game they play, which is rooted in, they got some kid to go into it. October 13th happens. Is it 13th or 14th?
14th. It's the 14th.
14th. October 14th happens, and he departs within it. And so it becomes this weird totem of sort of cosmic influence for these kids, so I just really love that aspect of it.
As a concept. So we obviously have a certain sort of faith-based background in which conversations around the event known as the rapture, all varieties of conversations have taken place about it. I'm not interested in the moment at those. The concept of just a vanishing is a powerful concept, and I feel like Lindelof and Parada are creative and inventive enough to really explore all of the different, maybe not every single facet, but there is so much baked into simply the occurrence of a vanishing that I feel like they capitalize on in some really profound ways, in some really inventive ways, like visualizing a pranked kid getting stuck in a refrigerator and they open it up and he's gone. He's not there. I mean, again, it's really powerful. The show has, I touched on a little bit last week, the show has, sort of tapped into moments like the missing bagel and Nora Durst's missing credentials and just all of these missing things that I think the show really does a great job of being creative and inventive in the way it plays around with those metaphors. And so, yeah, I find that really compelling, deeply compelling, actually.
This episode for me kind of, even though last week I said 6, 7, 8, it's more because I watched them all in quick succession, but is forgettable is the wrong word because there's a great run with Scott Glenn at the end. But other than that, I did like the dramatic turn of Tom discovering the other, the
Yes.
the
Oh,
doppelgangers of
yes.
he and Christine. Like that's a really,
Absolutely. Yes.
you don't even have to give a ton of screen time to it just to kind of place it there and turn the
Yeah.
turn the show on its head a little bit, or turn
Yeah.
those characters' journeys on their head a little bit. So that was really great.
Honestly, so this is an episode I had mentioned last week that I'm fonder of episode 6, Guest, which is like a benchmark of this season. And the episode we're going to be talking about after this is also really powerful and affecting. This episode 7, I wrote down 2 things. And the only things I wrote down were exactly what you just mentioned. I think that narrative pivot is really strong, and they do some cool things with it in the moment. It's energizing. And I like Scott Glenn. I even like Scott Glenn's character. I feel like this piece of the story so far has gone nowhere. It has created a couple of nice interactions, but I didn't have a lot this time around to really hang my thoughts on in terms of what exactly he's playing with. Scott Glenn is giving an amazing performance, and he's committing wholeheartedly. I love the way he interplays with these voices that he hears in his head. But I think I was expecting, even this time around, having already seen the show, I think I was expecting a little bit more out of this episode, because he shows up, rescues Jill from the refrigerator bit, and then I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. We're going to start getting into his character a little bit. But then even when we get into his character a little bit, I feel like this episode sort of leaves a lot on the table in a way that that I found it difficult to sort of connect to this one. 6, in the same way that episode 4 kind of left me a little hollow following how powerful episode 3 is, I wondered if episode 7 left me a bit the same, given how much I love episode 6. Maybe that's not a fair comparison, but that's what I'm feeling.
These premium style shows, and by these I mean things like this, even like a Watchmen, which is also Lindelof, but even thinking things like Game of Thrones, have developed, for whatever reason, this pattern of like big important episode in terms of maybe mythology or events that kind of have a decrescendo afterwards. So maybe that's pure speculation, but maybe that's something that's happening there. But also something I wonder about, where I haven't read the book, so I can't really speak to how much is or isn't in the original text, in the source text. But I wonder if Scott Glenn's presence in this episode specifically, because he has a decent amount of screen time late in it.
Yes.
Again, speculation. Where the show goes, where the series goes with Kevin's relationship to Patty, effectively, it's not really spoiler territory, requires a lot of buy-in as an audience member. And I just wonder, I wonder if they knew, again, not knowing what's in the book, I wonder if they knew on this back half of season 1, okay, this is roughly where we're going to aim if we come back. Like, who knows if they knew at that point. But this is roughly where we're going to aim, this dynamic. So we really have to cement what is kind of going on with Scott Glenn to illustrate the inheritance of it, that same phenomena in gosh, the actor's name just escaped me, but Kevin, Justin Theroux.
Oh,
does that make sense? Like, I just wonder if they're doing some string pulling to try to lay some mythology groundwork. I don't know. I'm just
the theory makes sense. I would find it more easy to embrace if I did not know that, by some admissions in Lindelof's interviews and stuff, that he kind of approaches every season as if he's never going to get another one. And so I know that that's part of his at least announced creative process, that he does not run the 3-year game. He runs the 1-year game. And if I never get another one, I want to make sure my story is told.
Post Lost, but yes.
Yes, post Lost. Yeah, because we know what doing the long game did for him on Twitter and everything. So,
Yeah.
so it's one of those things where knowing that about his creative process now, and also knowing about some of where season 2 and 3 go, I think it's probably more likely. And again, this is all speculation. Yours is speculation, and no more or less likely than mine. I feel that in my mind, it's perhaps that he knew in developing season 2 and then ultimately in developing season 3, because spoiler alert if you've never watched the show, the father of Kevin Garvey becomes a very big player in season 3, like thematically and as a character and everything. Like his journey is substantiated a lot more, and so I feel like that probably grew out of them utilizing what was already on the table rather than them playing with the notes right now. I cannot remember the father character from the book well enough to know how much of this is substantiated. I know Kevin Garvey's character had a father who went crazy. I remember that much about the novel. But I seem to recall that in the novel he was not the chief of police, he was the mayor or something. He was like a high political official or something. And so that piece is just kind of unknown to me. That having been said, I think Scott Glenn's performance compensates for what I would ding as narrative deficiencies in an episode like this. Scott Glenn is electric to watch. Like he's a really he's just an engaging performer, and in this more so than in other things I've seen him in. I like him as an actor, but I think he's particularly strong in this in a way that I think is makes it sort of worth hanging on to, but I just can't get around some of what I would consider it to be narrative deficiencies on this part. And like I said, those are the only two things that as I was watching it, I wrote down. Again, I've been very vocal about the fact that I don't like the Holy Wayne stuff, but I do like that plot wrinkle that Tom is not a unique character in his situation. And I like Scott Glenn's performance enough and some of the interior moments of that to give it some credibility. But beyond that, I don't. This is not an episode I'm very
Sure.
endeared to, just in general.
As much as clear.
Wow.
Wow. Speaking of
I'm just saying.
episodes we're endeared to. So, Riri, I've got like, geez Louise, a normal Fear of God episode's worth of notes on this episode, but can we start from the end?
Yeah, let's do that.
And
we're
sort of-
talking about episode 8 now, not
Yes.
episode 7. But yes, we're talking about episode 8.
Cairo, New York, where Kevin.
Cairo, New York.
Potato. Would spend summers or something like that. I wrote the last 10 minutes of this episode is Shakespeare. Like it is otherworldly. I'm always so fascinated with the craft. You know, we did a whole episode last year on writing King's memoir of the craft, and you look at the things that they choose to make happen, the narrative things, the beats that have to happen in this episode, which culminates in the death of Patty. But not just the death of Patty, the suicide of Patty. And you work backwards, and the scripting magic that has to happen for me as the viewer to not feel like you say you earned that. Does that make sense at all? Like in other words, you can't just jump into these sorts of narrative beats. Like the character progressions have to make some sense for these, at least in this episode, how it ends, wild choices to be made.
Yeah.
And I just am always so impressed with the craftsmanship that goes into writing characters. It reminds me of, and I referenced this on our Stephen King shorts conversations. I even think you went and found it. The one about the women driving the van to the theme park or whatever.
Yes. Herman Wouk is still alive. Yeah.
And the family, and they end up killing themselves and their kids in the back by driving off the road. And this weird thing that happened in the reading of that, which was, I understand why these characters have chosen this. And that's a really skillful thing to pull off.
Sure,
so
absolutely.
In an episode like this one, when it gets there, you're like, bravo. I mean, that
Yeah,
was
absolutely.
in performance and in writing, just masterful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel like it's I mean, you've sung the praises of Ann Dowd before.
Oh, gosh, she
as
kills
as
it.
as frequently, yes, absolutely. As frequently as she plays characters you kind of love to hate, she is an absolutely incredible performer. It's stunning what she's able to pull off in both subtle and overt ways. Um, and that, I mean, I can't even in a conversation like this unpack some of what they discuss because it has to be sort of experienced in that stream. So the premise of episode 8, if you're trying to keep up and kind of waiting or still listening to this segment before you actually watch it, the premise of episode 8 is the character of Patty, who is the head of this local chapter of the Guilty Remnant, and has been they've had a frustrating, she and Kevin have had a frustrating sort of dynamic of interaction because she causes him a lot of grief and frustration, but then she reached out to him for help when their member Gladys was brutally murdered, and so they've had this sort of irritating dynamic. Well, the premise of this episode would have you believe that Kevin Garvey blacked out, elicited the help of his friend. Can you call him friend? I don't know. This guy who hunts dogs and has no name and is just like a spectral figure in Kevin's life. So,
but real,
a real
Yeah.
person. And so presumably Kevin blacked out, enlisted his help to kidnap Patty, tie her up in a cabin off in Cairo where they are holding her. And when they're holding her there, he says he's going to, like they dance back and forth with whether or not they're going to let her go, whether they're going to kill her, whether, all of these crazy things. And the last like 10, 15 minutes of the episode, she's having this real existential and very thought-provoking conversation with him about a variety of different things. And it kind of culminates in him cutting her loose and saying that he's going to let her go and he's going to admit to what he's done. And it's at that point that he lets her go that she decides to end her life. And like you said, they had to, emotionally and narratively, they had to earn that. And I feel like the episode fully does. In a very complex way that you kind of have to endure and experience to really understand how they've done it. I had forgotten that she killed herself. I knew that she eventually died because of where I know, because I guess mild spoiler alert, she does not leave the show. She dies, but she does not leave the show. And because of where I knew she would again appear and how I knew she would appear, I knew that she died, but I could not remember in this moment that she took her own life until it actually happened.
That and the revelation that they staged Gladys's death.
Yes.
Or that not they staged it as in it's fake, but then they did it.
That they killed her. Yes. Which is, and it adds some new weight to that brutal moment because she's clearly in on it, but somehow loses her nerve at the end because the Guilty Remnant, one of their biggest aspects is that they're not supposed to speak. That having been said, for a leader of a cult who are devoted to silence, and Dad has a lot of lines in several episodes at this point. But she talks all throughout this episode. But she Gladys, as she was being murdered, begged them to stop, which is again adds to the brutality of it. But finding out that they staged that death, or that they sort of ordered that death, and that now it's rooted in Patty's own sort of self-chosen martyrdom and suicide. It's really affecting. It sounds probably very grim and a bit like, why in the world would I watch a show like that? But when you hear this dialogue and you hear some of the concepts that they're playing with, it's incredible. It's really incredible.
And I feel like this episode and this scene specifically, or rather the collection of scenes between Kevin and Patty, really shore up why this was a valuable conversation for you and I to have on this show.
Yes.
Insofar as the things we're trying to talk about. And I while it was happening, was typing basically her final monologue when he accuses her of still like why won't you let this go, the sudden departure. And
yes,
and she says, I think about it every waking moment. What else is there to think about?
Yeah,
it doesn't matter what happened. because he kind of challenges, do you know where they went? What happened? What do you know? She said,
Right.
it doesn't matter. The difference between you and me is I accept that it did. While you push it aside and ignore it, we strip ourselves of everything that distracts us from it, that keeps us from remembering. We strip away attachment and fear and love and hatred and anger until we are erased, a blank slate. We are living reminders of what you tried desperately to forget, and we are ready and waiting.
Yeah.
Man, it's intense. It is intense. And the two of them that's just an electric scene.
It really is. Yeah.
Otherwise, this episode's riddled with a lot of thematic stuff that, we can touch on or not. I don't know if you caught this. It's Memorial Day that they're prepping for, and this episode
I did not.
a week after Memorial Day, by the way.
Wow, I did not catch that.
We should have worked that out a little differently, but it's all
I
good.
didn't. Wow.
Now, I don't mean this to be a dumb question, but a couple weeks ago you said you couldn't recall what the GR's plot was. Has it resurfaced to you what's about to happen?
Not the specifics, but the generalities have. Like, because of that moment where they unload the truck of the bodies,
the loved ones, right?
Yes. So I remember something about, like, I think part of their intention, and again, the details are foggy. I watched this show once a few years ago, and now I'm catching up with it, and I'm not skipping ahead for, context or whatever. But I seem to remember somebody saying something like, when whatever their plot is divulged, I seem to remember somebody from the Guilty Remnant, like, writing down, like, we made them remember, or, something like, it's kind of throwing grief in people's faces, but I don't know exactly the specifics of exactly what they're playing with. But I think it's obviously it involves that company that makes bodies of people from photographs and stuff that they've stolen, but I don't remember what their end game is, or at least what the specifics of their details are. But we'll find out next episode.
We don't rush to end game, Reed.
Nope, we don't. And I would say the compulsion is strong to want to sort of dig into some of those kinds of things. I would encourage that we hold some of that, because this is meant to just be a sort of a follow the plots.
I was just making sure I wasn't ignoring anything that I really wanted to talk about that wasn't theme.
Yeah. But next week we will be having a full conversation about season 1 of The Leftovers. We'll be covering episodes 9 and 10 in their specifics, and then having a full thematic. That will be the substance of next week. It will be an episode on season 1 of The Leftovers and all of its narrative and thematic glory. I think the only thing for me that we've missed mentioning here that I do think is pretty significant is obviously Jill's personal journey, sort of confronting Nora about the gun, finding that coming up hollow, that brutal exchange she has with her friend on the grass.
Oh gosh, that's terrible.
Brutal exchange. And then breaking into Nora's house, finding the gun, then giving up the search, only to find her way on the doorsteps of the Guilty Remnant, asking if she can stay. What do you mean giving up the search?
The search was for the gun.
Yeah, but I felt, and maybe you read it differently, I felt that she was wanting to find the gun so she could do something about that, throw it in Nora's face, confront her with it, or something like that.
I think, but to me, and this is some thematic stuff I'm trying to hold off at the moment, but to me, my understanding of that is it's less about anything that happens in light of the gun and whether the gun is still in Nora's possession, because at all.
I see. Okay.
And
got it.
And because this question hangs heavy over this episode and over this series, can we be okay? After trauma you be made okay? And to Jill, she sees post Wayne hug Nora and doesn't buy it. Although, I think Nora is truthfully on a better path at this moment than she was pre-Wayne. So I do think it's real and not false. But Jill, and I think a lot about, even though I don't love later parts of the series, but in Game of Thrones, when Tyrion, maybe the first time he has scenes with Daenerys and owns up to his cynicism and says a cynic is just someone looking for something to believe in.
Right.
And I think about that with Jill, like she's desperate to believe you can be okay in this world. And so the absent, if Nora has divested herself of this gun, is a signal to her, okay, something can be corrected and made whole. And so that's why finding it shatters that illusion for her, and why she, to me, ends up at the GR, which is, we can't be okay. We're not going to be okay.
I like and will henceforth adopt your reading of that moment, because I think it's substantive. I think I agree with it. There's just too many narrative threads that reading of it makes sense. So yeah, I agree. So if that's okay with you, I think that brings us to another moment of well, ladies and gentlemen, it has been found. It has been sought for. It was missing, but now we know where it is. And I'm not quite sure what it is, but it's there, and we just talked about it. It's in The Leftovers, Season 1, Episodes 7 and 8, on this installment of #TV Guideposts. Join us next week for not only coverage of Episodes 9 and 10, but a full conversation about all of the thematic complexities of Season 1 of HBO's The Leftovers. So, okay, bye-bye. Now, talk to you then. Okay, bye.
I think we're going to need the audience to do that one, too. No, that one's too fun. It's too of the moment. So,
there we are.
Read what lies in the shadow of the statue.
Nathan. Oh, good call there. Oh, man. So I had seen this movie before.
Yeah, let's just do it. Let's just drop a
seen
missile through the roof.
I'd seen it. Oh, man. There's a grenade in a backpack.
And then there's a missile in the roof. That's a whole new metaphor.
No kidding. So I had seen this film before. I watched it pretty tangential, I think, to its release. And I feel like it was funny because we've been tap dancing around this for a while, where I've been like, I'm trying my best to kind of hold back some of my feelings on films so that I don't pivot you too much. Because
remind me. Well, I'm going to interrupt you here because
this
is conversation time. Can you point to? I'm asking legitimately because I can't recall. Can you point to ones where you inadvertently overhyped me that you remember, or that you kind of signaled and it led to a more dampened response from me?
To be honest, I can't remember specifics. I feel like, in general, that has been the case. Most recently, I feel like, not just my overhype, but I think the general awareness and overhype of Stir of Echoes probably dampened your ability to view that film as a surprise and as an unexpected delight. But no, I think it's just more a sensibility that I know if I over prep you for like, hey, be ready, this one's super scary, then you go in and you're like, oh, this is not as scary as I was expecting.
It's like Stir of Echoes, you just kept the bacon in too long, it burned. I like that was a really clever response. Or non-response. Yes, carry on.
But I remember when I saw this film, and good Lord, I cannot remember. I believe, if memory serves me correctly, I was trying in our first pass for #Speaking in Tongues for this to be considered something that we. You can't hide your on the video.
I went to speaker view. I had X'd out a gallery view. It wasn't going to be on me. I knew what I was trying to do, and you just ruined it.
It's okay. It's okay. We'll go back into it. I'll ramp up again. I can kind of remember that when we were ramping up for #Speaking in Tongues, Under the Shadow was on my mind because I had seen it. And I knew what a powerful and affecting film I thought it was. And I can't remember exactly why it didn't quite make the cut on our installments of #Speaking in Tongues. Might have been something related to just some similar regions or something. I can't remember exactly why we made some determinations not to do it that time around. So when the opportunity came again with like Hauntings and Remnant and all this other kinds of, and grief and loss, not grease and loff.
You got bacon on the brain.
I do. But this time around, I thought, no, I think now's a good time to dive in on it. And I actively sort of like, A, I hadn't seen it since its release. And then B, I didn't want to amp up my memory for it, only to go in and be like, oh yeah, this is good, this is fine. So when I rewatched it again, which was a few nights ago, when I rewatched it again, and I was sitting there through the whole last half hour of the movie, like struggling to breathe, and I was sitting here like, oh my God, I forgot how freaky this movie is, and I forgot how absolutely terrifying this movie is. And so I was like, okay, I'm probably just being a wuss. I'm scared of piles of clothes. I don't know what to do with my life, like, so I'm probably just being a wuss, and I'm not gonna do anything. So when I started getting your reactions to watching this movie, it delighted my heart so much.
It did something to my heart, but
what'd you think of this movie, Nathan? What'd you think?
Oh, schnit, man. Yeah, it darn MPAA. So I went to start this, and it was like PG-13. I've been doing this 3 years. I can handle the hard stuff. By the end, I was like, I can't handle it. I can't handle it. Give me some PG. I go back to Monsters Inc.
This is a scary movie, man.
Well, and it's so funny because like foreign language films for what we do. So I was excited by, it's an hour 20. Sweet. But foreign language films for what we do and how I consume them end up taking like an extra 50% worth of time because I'll pause it and take notes and stuff because I don't want to miss the actual dialogue.
Oh, right. So
I was just engaging a lot. So the point being, my defenses got real low. I mean, like, because I was just trying to turn it on. I'm like, just, trying to get my head in the world. And 5 minutes in, I'm going to pause and write down an observation. So it just starts threading out the whole experience. Yes. So that, then by the end, I'm just like flipping and flopping, just unable to I was so low by the time, not low down sad, but just like so defenseless.
Relaxed.
Yes, relaxed. I was relaxed. And that is a terrible place to be when the junk starts happening.
Because I feel like this film is an hour and 24 minutes long, and that, taking account for some credits.
You had to do that? You're just like,
no, but
that's
what I'm saying.
20, and you're like, hour 24.
But that's what I'm saying. It's like, no, I'm making a very specific point here because I feel like for nearly an hour of the movie, not much scary happens. It's interesting. It's not boring, but I feel like it's more sort of character based and more sort of developing a mystery and developing an atmosphere and something. But it goes, so the premise of this film is there's a woman and her daughter and her husband that live in war-torn Tehran in the 1980s. And she has had a pretty devastating blow to her personal dreams in that because she was politically active in the early days of her college career, she is no longer permitted at university where she can study to be a doctor, which is what she dreams of being. So you're kind of given
her husband
that
is also a very accomplished doctor.
Exactly. And so you're given that in the beginning. So then the husband is called basically into the war effort, I'm presuming as a medic, but he's called into the war effort. And so when he's called in there, she and her daughter are left alone. Well, there are these bombings and raids. I mean, the opening text scroll of the film identifies that like fear and anxiety were everywhere because there were these bombings and raids in Tehran at this time. So then one by one, and this is what you kind of are getting relaxed into. There's lots of character moments and lots of cool, there's a couple of little like, oh, that's jarring that we can maybe talk about in a moment. But it lulls you in with this sense of, oh, this is just a character-based thing. There's probably a mystery at its center, whatever. By the time you reach the last 20 minutes of the movie, maybe 25, the situation is She and her daughter are the only people left in this building because everybody else has chosen to leave so that the bombs don't like destroy them. So everybody else has chosen to leave. It's just them in this building. And the film ratchets up to such an alarming degree of tension that, to your point, you've been sort of disarmed.
Lulled.
Yes, you've been disarmed by, and it goes so intense in those last 20 to 25 minutes. I mean,
How intense, Reed?
It goes so intense. Like, I mean, like,
There's
man,
a picture in my face.
the videos that you sent me and the look on your face and your full body reactions to what you were experiencing were just, I mean, it was a perfect encapsulation of exactly what this film will do to you. Because yeah, I mean, that's the thing is we're going to sit here and hype.
And also because there was a film this came up on recently, and I can't remember what it was, but talking about kind of limited resources breeding innovation.
Yes, of course. Yes.
A criticism I had of last week's film, Stir of Echoes, is it feels overproduced to me. There's just too much happening visually that, like, it is telling you this is a mystery ghost story movie. Like, just from almost frame one. Well, from frame one.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
This part of the lulling effect is it's so naturalistic. There is nothing to signal to you anything askew until it is super late, and even then there's pretty limited visual effects. It's not all, but probably about 80% of the actual stuff that really alarms you is all in camera stuff. It's not post work.
Yeah, and it's it's in many ways evocative. You do see some things. Like, it's not that they're making impressions of things. You see things more than you want to see. But it is difficult for me. Like, it would be really easy for me to sit here and pitch to all of our listeners, oh my gosh, this movie is so scary. Be warned, this movie is terrifying. And then them spend the first 30 minutes going, what in the world is so scary about this movie? Like, or even
God done jumped the shark.
Right. Or 40 minutes in. But I feel like just sort of, if you experience those last 20 to 25 minutes, like, I can remember watching it and thinking, as I often do, like, is this a film that could make the list of movies that maybe my wife could watch with me on some, Halloween or something? But then when I got into those last 20 minutes, I was like, oh my God, no.
My wife heard me and came upstairs to check on me.
I know.
So loud at one point.
Oh,
because when I got these things on, I can't hear myself that well, and I knew. So, listeners, Reed and I use one of these social media apps to send little talkie videos to each other, and in the moment, because I was so relaxed and unready, I needed comfort, and just the thought of you receiving my energy was at least some mild comfort, because I was so just like cut loose. It was like I was tethered to a reality, which was me just watching this naturalistic, really thoughtful piece about a mom and her daughter in war-torn Tehran, and about their ability or not to engage things. Like, okay, well, maybe this is just kind of what the movie is. It's more suggestive than actual literal sort of stuff.
Right.
And so then I'm just like, nope. See you, Nathan. I just float off into the air, and I'm like, oh my God, Reed. So I send a sequence of videos, which will probably make part of the, kind of advertising for this pod episode. But
at some point
in one of them, I loudly kind of exclaimed a thing. And right when I did, I was like, I think I was probably too loud, but I can't really tell anything anymore.
Okay. So listeners, just check this out, because this is part of the audio that like, that's the second video. Oh my God. You were crying out for Jesus.
I was. And I didn't know he was so short.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, anyway, I will say the film kind of had some Babadook energy going on. I don't know if you felt that vibe.
I didn't know. I totally did. I mean, there are some similarities in just the fact of isolated mother and child. Admittedly, in Babadook it's a son, but
right.
There are remnants of that. And
remnant.
But I also I just find the the film does an exceptional job of layering on the threat long before it ever actually displays the threat. And what I mean by that is the moment they've been talking about this whole like possession aspect. They've been talking about like, oh, it possesses you, or it steals something that's precious to you, and then it possesses you. They've been layering that on in ways that it doesn't even pretend or try to be scary about. So then when she hurries out, because the bomb ratings have started again and they're the only ones in there. So when she hurries out and runs down the steps because she's lost sight of her daughter for literally 10 seconds. So then when they are running down the stairs and the movie begins to play with this whole, did she run away with her daughter, or did she run away with some version of the monster thing? That's all been baked into the narrative in ways that it just sort of planted seeds for, that it didn't waste its time trying to scare you then. It just planted the seeds for it to allow it to culminate in a moment that is alarmingly nerve-wracking.
Well,
in that whole sequence.
Real quick before because honestly, I've got like 13 scares for like 2 not scares. One, trivia bits wise, did you notice this? It's the director's first film.
That's amazing. That's amazing and infuriating. Yes.
And congratulatory. Worthy.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So I think you may have said this, but to further set up the plot, the daughter has been gifted by the dad before he leaves this doll, which the Swedish chef earlier was signaling. So the dad gifts her this doll, basically like, this is how you'll always have me near you. Well, the doll goes missing early on, or
yes,
a third of the way through. And so the what keeps them there is this child's insistence that we find this doll, and ultimately the mom aligns with that mission because she wants to be on her side. We do need for second time in 2 weeks to give out a bummer award, Reed, because if you as a husband ever say to your wife, is it my fault you didn't finish your studies? Didn't you waste your time on politics at university? You deserve the bummer award.
Yep, you deserve a bummer award.
That is
the dad in this is he's frustrating to me because he seems like an okay guy, seems to genuinely care for his family, but like, man,
I'm a so father.
So father, Mike Tyson for president. So if you've never seen the Chris Rock show, that joke will go right over your head. Yeah. But no. So it's like you can't point to him directly and fault him for a ton of very deliberate things. There's just a tremendous amount of passivity and lack of sensitivity that culminate in her appearing to us to be utterly alone. And
but I think also what you're identifying, and this came up, I wondered if this was the case, what might have supplanted this during Speaking in Tongues was A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night.
Maybe
another Mideastern sort of horror tale. And because once I started getting so relaxed, I was like, okay, well, Under the Shadow, maybe it's just really kind of playing with some gender idea here and women's role in the society. Because I watch this and I think, well, the husband's a jerk. Someone from that culture might watch this and be like, well, that's kind of just how we are, or how
that's what
it
happens
is in terms of gender relationships. But I also think that becomes part of the text too, which is the oppression of a thing, literally and figuratively. I mean, that terrible scene when I'm trying to find mom's name, Shade. They have a haunting happens, and she leaves the house with Dorsa, the Explorer.
Yeah. Oh. No. Was that spontaneous, or have you been waiting for that? Did you? Did you write that down?
I
It's
didn't
like,
write it down, but I
gonna
thought it the
sneak
whole
attack.
movie, and then I forgot until just this moment. So was it spontaneous? Was it premeditated? Yes, both of the
Is
above.
it
The
baby
daughters,
Jesus? Is
the
it just a doll? Is it?
yes, perfect.
Whew.
The daughter's name is Dorsa, and all I was watching it, I kept thinking Dorsa. So
Oh
the
my
mom
God.
flees the house with the daughter, but in her haste, she does not put on her wrap. And
Yeah. Is that, man?
what?
My cultural footprint is going to show itself right now. Is that a hijab? Is that what they're talking about? The
Yeah.
wrap that
Yes.
that's okay. Yes.
We need to wiki some things real quick.
I don't know.
I'm kidding. Point being, she leaves without the wrap. I wasn't going to call it a thing because I didn't want to do what you just did. But
Well, I'll just do it.
it's done. Anyway, when she gets picked up, they berate her. I can't remember if is it law enforcement or just
Law enforcement
here?
catches her.
Yeah.
No,
They
law enforcement
berate
catches her.
for
Mhm.
being out of the house, and it's like this is why X, Y, and Z. I'm like, dadgum.
Well, and the line I might bring it up a little bit later, but the line that he says is so devastating. He says, "A woman should be scared of exposing herself more than anything else."
Yes.
I'm like, oh my God.
Well, and then
horrible.
I do have it written down under themes. His next line is, "Our men are becoming martyrs to protect these values."
Yes. Right. Oh man. Yeah. I'm sure we'll go there.
Oh,
Yeah.
we'll go.
Oh man.
We'll go away. Let's go to the scares, Riri, because that's really all this movie.
Yeah.
It kind of crowds out everything else by the end.
Yeah, there's a lot to love about this film. We could really sort of break into that, but
the toast, the friggin' toast.
That's the first note on my list. That
piss off, toast. That joke made me jump so bad. So I'm telling you, I was so just chilling, just like, all right, this is a. Reed said this is a scary movie. Reed, this is in our. We're talking about it. It's PG-13 though.
You were sitting there like, it's PG-13, whatever.
And then like toast. I'm like, oh my God.
Maybe it's got some socially relevant themes, but
yeah.
And then suddenly, no, it's got some toast. It's got some toast for you. Oh my gosh. So the toast was literally my very first note. The second note is that, and I included it in scares, but it's also kind of a love. The image when they step into the room and the missile is just resting on the floor of the living room, but it has come down through the roof. That gave me chills. Like, just the visual image is so arresting, and it is completely it just pushes you back, because you see their reaction to it. They walk in, they're shocked, and then suddenly you look and it's an expansive, massive thing just sitting in the middle, and it could explode.
I'm just reading these notes and getting freaked out, Reed. I'm going to be real honest with you.
Yeah. Oh, it's yes, indeed.
Yes, the missile.
So yeah, there's that.
The toast. I mean, the toast in this movie is scary, Reed.
It is. No, it's true. It's true.
Like you could rank these. So the
oh, I have
the sure. I'm gonna skip this one to go to what is the first real that one hadn't happened yet. The first real oh my God is the ghost husband in the bed. Dude, that I was laying in my bed watching this movie. I was like, no. I was like, no. Mama, no. I'm not.
My wife better not come up and check on me.
Throw her ass out of here.
Women, no.
I'm gonna be damned. I accept my award.
Oh my God.
Yeah, man. That was terrible.
Oh, that's awful.
All right.
So I think we listed all the same scares because that was the next on my list, and then the next one is like, well, for me, the next one was the naked man, like Just
Oh,
they wake
no,
up.
no. Before that.
Before that, what happened before that?
Is the arm in the window.
Oh my God. Oh my
I
God.
mean,
I can't believe I didn't write that down. Oh my God.
It's been like, I don't know, 35 years since I pooped in a bed, but it happened last night.
I know how old you are, and that took you a while.
I was like, that was pretty recent. Don't tell that one. That was the train of thought that happened. Don't tell the most recent one. Skip to the one before it was 35 years ago.
Oh man, I tell you what.
That arm through that window.
Yeah, I know.
So that happens, and then she's looking through it, and the flutter happens, and
yeah,
got hair on my face.
You're freaking yourself out.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, that was terrible. That was absolutely terrible. And then like that's when things like start to ratchet up a little bit, and then like most of the people.
It started with the toast.
Well, it did, but like by that point, most of the people in the apartment complex have left. Like a lot of her friends are just sort of like they've drifted off to go out of the city so that they're not subject to the assault of these bombings, these random bombings that happen. And so then her and her daughter, because they're sleeping in the same bed now because her husband is off in the war, and her and her daughter wake up and they see like a man at the foot of the bed. That's enough. Like the naked man standing at the foot of the bed is enough. But then they get out. She gets out, she like runs after him, and when she gets out and runs after him, that fool is escaping up through the ceiling in the crack that the missile created. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I watching?
Well, but again, it's the execution. It's not the act.
Yeah,
like
right.
It's I would wager a lot of even that moment is in camera stuff. Like, I'm sure there's probably a little bit of visual effects going on there. But it's just like, was that a naked old man running down the hall? Oh my God. Oh, what? Oh my God. He's like crawling through this room. Oh God. Hold me, Reed.
Okay. So the next moment that I have.
My bummer award.
So the next moment that I have is when she steps out into the stairwell.
Tell it, Reed.
And the door's open. She steps out in the stairwell. Nathan, when I was watching this movie, you can't make this up. And people are going to think I'm making it up. I know. That's the problem is I'm going to tell this story. And people are like, you're just tired. You're just saying that. No. I'm watching this movie. I'm sitting there, and you've made fun of me for 2 weeks in a row about being afraid of piles of clothes. And I'm sitting there watching this movie. And when I'm sitting there watching this movie, and then this poor woman runs up in the stairwell. And then when she turns around from the stairwell, in a flash, there is this cloaked thing. Yeah, like a big sort of sheet that darts in to their apartment real quick, and the door slams behind it, and it's very alarming. It's very jarring. And that would be scary in and of itself. That was because then after that moment happens, like seconds later, Nathan, a jacket from the coat rack beside me like falls off of its hinge, like completely random.
It's like life becomes art, becomes life, becomes
and
art,
I was
becomes
and,
life.
And I had to pause the movie, and I had to walk around for a minute, and I had to turn on some lights, and I had to be like,
you gotta go change your drawers.
Maybe I did. maybe this is not the moment for me to do this. Maybe I need to just reconstruct the rest of this film from memory, because I cannot continue to tolerate this. It was one of those, like, I mean, you were talking about hashtag poop club, like, oh my God. Yeah, it was.
This movie reset the poop club bar. Like, if you, listener, viewer, if you had previously been admitted to poop club through our, mail away service, the Scratch and Sniff.
No. Oh my God. The mail away Scratch and Sniff service. Oh my God.
If that's how you got in previously, we've got to redo it. It's a whole new club. It's a whole new club after Under the Shadow. Under the Shadow. Good night.
Oh my God, that was so funny. Oh my God. Okay.
I mean, I
keep it
had
together,
to. While we're here, we'll go. Read, man, friggin' teeth guy. Oh my God.
Because see, but that's the thing, is that it's all of a piece, because that's the thing, is like she gets freaked out by the Jen thing, and then she runs out of the apartment. They're trying to escape because they're going to leave. They're finally going to leave. The bombings are happening. They're finally getting out of there. She's trying to leave. She's hurrying. And then she goes into her bedroom while her daughter is in her daughter's bedroom, and they're away for like 10 seconds from each other. And so then when she runs down the hall, and I already knew, like when she runs down the hall, they did one, and I need to rewind the moment to confirm this. Maybe my imagination was playing tricks on me, but I feel like when the daughter comes out of the room, the daughter is putting on her jacket, and underneath the jacket, I feel like there is the slightest flutter of an image of that sheet that was on the apparition that we've seen before. And maybe my imagination was playing tricks with me. Maybe it was an intentional sort of seed planting on the filmmaker's part. I would need to go back and rewatch the moment specifically, but I feel like there's just this impression of that sheet underneath the jacket that the daughter's putting on, which is just enough to pivot you into, oh no, has the jinn traded places with her, and is the mom running, potentially escaping with the jinn as opposed to escaping with the daughter? Well, sure enough, they get down into the basement, and she begins to hear her daughter screaming and crying out for her upstairs.
What's funny about you, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's funny about you saying that is initially I wondered, was it the mute kid got left behind and all of a sudden was breaking his silence? But it took me a second. And when she says, I hear you, or I hear her, I was like, oh God.
Well, and then she turns the flashlight on the daughter, and the daughter looks away for a second and won't show her face. So it only further entrenches.
Well, I think too, I think why that moment is so well done is the mom is in the foreground and the daughter behind her is obscured enough visually from us. So flashlight or not, we can't tell for certain what is
back there. No, absolutely. And it's nerve-wracking because then this mom has to make this dreadful decision. Is she, and I was pretty convinced. I'm like, okay, well, clearly she's left her daughter behind, and this is the jinn, and she needs to get back up there and rescue her daughter. So then she does. She leaves the being that she's with down in the basement. She runs back up. She is frantically searching for her daughter. Her daughter's crying out for her. Her daughter is under the bed, being pulled by something. And so she reaches in under the bed to rescue. No, it ain't right, because she reaches in under the bed to rescue her daughter. And then when she pulls on its hand, that's when not only does it reveal that, like, no, this has been the deception the whole time, but the jinn's face is revealed, and it's like a huge mouth with gigantic teeth that is super freaky. And oh my gosh. So yes, scary. Yes. The whole last half hour of this movie is so dang tense, y'all. Like it's just completely nightmarish. And oh my god.
Well, and what I love about that moment so much that plays on the themes it's been building is this mom who is wrestling with her own relationship to her child. And there's at least once previous to that basement separation, maybe more than once, where the mom intentionally separates herself from the daughter to go do something else, to go assist others who are in need. And so the mom in that moment is acting on these thematic threads that have started to accumulate, which is, I actually think I left her and I need to go get her. In other words, you see what I'm saying?
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Whereas knowing it's the real daughter there, she's thinking, why are you just once more separating from me? And what she goes and almost gets
chopped. Oh my gosh. It's brutal.
Well, dang it. I'm going to say something after that.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I mentioned on the Changeling 2 weeks ago how after that I was like, bolting up the stairs and stuff. Fortunately, because this movie isn't that long, my wife was still up when it was over, but she was downstairs. I mean, I was so keyed up for like half an hour.
Oh, I believe it.
To like pace downstairs.
Yeah, I believe it.
Like, I can't. I just ate. I pulled a Rooney Mara and a ghost story and just like ate. I just sat on the floor and just ate all the things.
Oh my god!
I was so traumatized.
It's a really alarming movie. And to be honest with you, like I don't think this is the like I feel like even knowing every beat that's coming, it's hard to disassociate yourself. If you've paid attention in this in the film, if you've sort of bought in on the film, that last 20-25 minutes will just put you through the ringer. But I think that's what's so amazing about the film, is that the film is patient in dealing with like establishing its parameters, establishing its characters, setting the stage, setting the atmosphere without toast popping up aside without really wasting cheap scares early. Like there is very little scary
There's
about
nothing.
about that first hour. So then when everything gets scary, it gets super scary. And so
It's like they turned it up to 11.
they turned it up to 11. So there is I don't know if you had, I'm going to defer to you, or at least pivot. Like did you have some specific things thematically that you wanted to dive in on or touch on? I have a couple of ideas, but I don't want to dominate the conversation.
That's a first.
Right now.
One kind of main, I did a poor job of this, but I was trying in my brain today to thread a little bit of this first phase of Remnant. And, like, excuse me, when I laugh a lot, listeners, I end up needing to clear my throat a lot. This is good. It's reflective of good things.
Yes.
So a ghost story, changeling, stir of echoes, now under the shadow. And this idea of, this idea of place. And I went into this a little bit on Stir of Echoes, how a ghost story is about our connectedness, our attachment to geographic place. Changeling and Stir of Echoes having a relevance to place in terms of station and status. And I was trying to figure out, okay, how does Under the Shadow do this? And if it did it at all. And I'm hoping this triggers some response in you in terms of just inciting some conversation here, because I got real energized but I don't have a ton of meat on the bones here. So it stood out to me that in Under the Shadow versus, okay, so in a ghost story, we're aware of who this ghost is and are given some sort of insight into their desire, motivation, conscious choice, right? Like we're given insight into what's going on, sort of emotionally, if you will, psychologically, if you will, in that character. Then in the Changeling and Stir of Echoes, while our perspective character is now the living, we're still given backstory to the ghosts that are haunting those stories. And so it really stood out to me that other than just sort of, they sort of nod to this and or maybe give a lot of, kind of viability to it. I was just flipping and flopping in bed. It was hard for me to keep up, but we're not given really anything. The specters, the entities doing the haunting in this film aren't personaed. They just are ill intent. Is that what is that? Oh, that's Daredevil. I thought it was Breaking Bad for a minute when Kingpin says, "I am the ill intent." Whatever.
No.
Brains all over the place. So the specters doing the haunting in Under the Shadow are not given persona and characterization. That's a good way to look at it. So in this notion of place, I was like, okay, well, how does this work? And man, I was just really arrested by the idea of, because what is the backdrop of this movie? It is war and conflict. And something that I landed on that really just kind of took my breath away was, what does it look like when, instead of a specter haunting a physical geography, we, the living, terrorize and haunt the land itself, the place itself. When the land itself responds. Does this make sense at all? Like,
I mean, I'm tracking so far. Yeah.
Like, it just really jumped out at me because this thing is not given motivation. So then what is the source point? It's in the film, their aggression, violence towards each other and towards the land itself. I mean, the husband says it, like, the rumors are they're going to, kind of burn it to the ground. And that starts to kind of take shape. And just, I don't know, I was just really kind of arrested by, and maybe I'm not making a ton of sense on it, but the idea of, instead of an essence attached to a physical location haunting the living, what if we, the living, by our transgression, are haunting and transgressing the land itself?
So there's some of this.
Does that distinction kind of seem to make some sense?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. There is. So I'm thinking of a number of distinct things in quick succession. I'm gonna try to rapid fire through them. Very first thing that came to mind is, we've referenced it a few times. It's from the novel Room. They recontextualized it a bit for the film Room. But the concept of a crater. A crater is a hole where something happened. Okay, so that's the first thing that came to mind. Second thing that came to mind is my sister happens to be a big Civil War buff, and also is just like fascinated by certain ghost stories and everything like that. And presumably, the battlefield of Gettysburg is one of the most haunted locations in the United States, and because of just the titanic nature of the conflict that took place there and all of the people that had died there. Not just that they're specters, if you believe in ghosts,
Sure.
not just that their specters just sort of remain there, but just, to your point, this was a big deal on this land.
The land has been violated. The land itself.
Yes. And in the same way, I'm not a New Yorker, so I wouldn't be able to necessarily speak deliberately about this, but in the same way that I would imagine certain New Yorkers feel about tragedies like 9/11 and stepping foot in that space again, that there has been, again, in Room's language, a hole where something happened, that there has been a scarring of that space, if you will. The other thing that it brings to mind, and I've said this in different spiritual contexts before about different subjects. There's a passage in the book of Ezekiel where there's a very, very popular passage in the book of Ezekiel where Ezekiel is looking out over a valley of dry bones, and the Lord compels him to call the dry bones to life. And that's a powerful, a very affecting passage of scripture. I have frequently been galvanized by, if my memory serves me correctly, I believe that is Ezekiel chapter 37. I believe, I don't have it in front of me, didn't fully prepare to talk about it, but Ezekiel chapter 36 has an interesting passage wherein Ezekiel is compelled by the Lord to speak to the mountains, to speak to the land, and what's interesting to me about that flow and rhythm of that story is the Valley of Dry Bones gets all the attention, but in this flow of the book of Ezekiel, the Lord asked Ezekiel to put the land on notice, not a people, not a group, asked him to put the land on notice, which I really found very interesting. And again, I don't have the passages pulled up, and they would be too long to quote verbatim anyway. So I do find a tremendous amount of energy behind what you're saying, is that we frequently think about haunted places as in something that is haunted by something from the other side of things. We don't often think about the damage we do in the physical spaces we inhabit by the actions that we so, I say carelessly, but sometimes care is really not part of the conversation right now. The actions that we wrought about on our place. You visited, so could speak to it much more directly, but you visited the memorial, and forgive me for not knowing the name, that was
Peace and Justice. Yeah.
for peace. Yes, Memorial for Peace and
EGI,
Justice.
EGI,
Yes,
yeah.
is that what it's called, from EGI?
Yep.
And they, if memory serves, collected soil from different places
Lynching sites.
where lynches took place.
Lynchings.
I say lynches, sorry. Where lynchings took place. And I just think there's a lot of consideration to be made about the fact that we ourselves, as given charge over creation, given in the biblical account of the story of the garden and Genesis, given some degree of responsibility over creation, and given in that text, given authority and responsibility. Do well with this. You are given, this is given to you to take care of, in the same way that I, over my child, am given a measure of authority, and I am given a measure of responsibility. Obviously, the child matures out of that at a certain point, but a baby, I'm given authority over that child. I take that child and care for it, and the responsibility that's associated with that. And we don't often think of that in the context of like geographic considerations. The other thing that it makes me think, and I know this is just a bevy of thoughts that I'm just spewing out a lot, but the other thing that it makes me think of is the ways in which we can personalize catastrophe that may not necessarily directly involve us. Like, I think about them, the wife and daughter, they're not engaged in this Iran-Iraq conflict. They're not engaged in that directly. But it is taking place, and they consider, as these things are taking place to them, as this violation is happening, they consider that they are being hunted by something that is much more specific and much more personal. And it makes me feel, if I can culminate these two things together, and hopefully I'm making some degree of sense as well, because it's a big subject. Trauma comes to the place where we are. Trauma comes to it has found you. It is upon you. Catastrophe has interrupted your space and interrupted your flow of life, and catastrophe has come, and maybe you didn't cause it. And I'm not talking about personal catastrophes that are caused by our choices and bad behaviors and bad decisions, but maybe a catastrophe came that you did not cause, and it has made this space, that building, that land, that place, it has made it so untenable and made it so difficult to sit in that same place that you've now personalized, which is kind of understandable because it happened to you, but you've personalized the catastrophe because of the way that it affected you, because of the specific things that it did to you. Let me not be too enigmatic on this.
Good word.
The way that this current global pandemic has affected us, it's affecting everybody, but it's affecting each individual as well. So it's going after everything all at once, but it is also affecting people, individual in their lives. Some people have lost jobs, some people have lost incomes, some people have lost loved ones, some people have lost health. All of those things make it difficult to find consolation in the fact that it's happening everywhere else, because it's also simultaneously happening to us. And there's two sort of threads trying desperately to tie it together, but like a sheet skirting into the apartment, they keep losing each other. I feel like there's the conversation around the ways in which we, as physical, tangible beings, haunt and scar the land in which we inhabit. We haunt that. And in the same way, as that is haunted by us collectively, humanity, we can intensely personalize catastrophes that may or may not. I'll say it this way and then I'll stop. it's far too easy for us to view like something like this global pandemic as a deliberate attack against our own hopes and dreams, and to view it as something that is deliberately sinister, trying to come and upend us, causing us in many cases to react in ways that will further haunt the space we inhabit, instead of finding any sense of peace or freedom. And I don't know. These are. I don't know if all of that just sort of made sense, but I'm thinking about this personalization. I'm thinking about the ways that we scar our environments, and I don't know. It feels very big right now. I feel under the shadow of the conversation.
Understandably. Far be it for me to let a conversation go by without referencing Richard Rohr, but there's an episode that you're talking about conjured in my memory of the episode is actually called, I think, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil. It's actually a pretty loaded title, but actually a really amazing conversation. And so that's a puzzle piece. Another puzzle piece is a crater where something happened. Another puzzle piece is EJI's work with the lynching memorial. And in that podcast conversation, Rohr does something really, I think, valuable, which is extricate the world, i.e. creation, and systems within the world that we have propagated, good and bad,
Yes,
just
sure.
ways humanity operates inside of creation.
Yes. Okay.
Because, and the reason he's real deliberate about separating those two things is the scripture reference that talks about the world, the flesh, and the devil will often be erroneously assigned to creation itself as marred, corrupt, like that the creation is so. And these are things even pre my time ingesting Rohr's material that I would have said, that creation itself is a good. I think about Ian talking on maybe Dr. Sleep, like life is good, like the essence, the materiality, going back to that, of life is a good in the capital G sense. And I wonder, the image I'm picturing is like a bubble. Think like the shimmer in Annihilation, but we contextualized the shimmer in that conversation as maybe being a positive. I'm just going with the mental image, not so much the connotations of it. So in this, talk about big ideas here, right?
Yeah.
I actually think this is a pretty simple movie on a certain level, but is inviting all of this. Like, so you've got the world as and in that concentric circle, a concentric circle inside of that is the systems of the world. And we all operate inside of that bubble.
Yeah.
And your invoking EJI was momentous for me in sort of wrapping my head around some of this stuff. Like, I'm just going to say these things and try to figure out how to piece the puzzle together. But like what happens, and I think this is part of faithfulness, what happens when you step outside of that bubble and are able to at least comprehend that it exists. We'll never be able to fully kind of ascertain its enormity.
Right.
And by it, I'm simply referring to just this totality, the ways humans have developed and operate in the world, not the world itself. If you could step out of that and observe it, and not just observe it, but look at what its operation has wrought to creation. It's almost like it's Treebeard turning to walk away and seeing what is happening to Fangorn.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's waking up to recognition that the mechanisms we've instituted that are in the film, war and violent physical conflict, that in our country are political and psychological conflict.
Sure. Yeah.
That those things agitate in ways that are imperceptible to us if we're not attempting to be outside the bubble.
Right.
And I
right.
just wonder, like this, I'm getting real metaphysical, and I'm trying to ground it a little bit here, because that's what I felt like your EJI example did for me. Was, what does it look like to ask forgiveness of creation?
Mm, mm,
Right?
mm.
Like,
Yeah.
what is
Right.
that?
Right.
And I feel like that, if there is a most mature version of lived faith, it might be something to do with that.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
it's no
Yes.
longer about well, you wronged me, so it's you and I, this real intimate. You use the word personal, and I think you're not wrong, and I think you might agree with where I'm going with this. We have so microscoped that the tiniest infraction is the most wretched transgression,
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
instead of seeing, okay, there is it's forgiving that bubble. It's forgiving reality for being itself. It's acknowledging this thing is real and is present in violence, in psychological torment and conflict on a civilizational scale, and being able to say to creation and the God who breathed it, are we can you forgive us?
Mm, mm.
Which isn't me putting on atonement mentality. It's saying,
No, I understand.
we participate, we are breaking this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, and thus in turn, it's a drink takes a man builds a system builds a system eats a man.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
what does it look like to walk in humility for the ways we continue to transgress and participate in those systems? I don't know, maybe I'm far afield of what you were scratching at, but
No, I do think it's all it's all a piece. There's a lot of this series is about remnants. This
yes.
series is about what's left after something's gone. You know, like this moment that we're in is all about taking a look at how our lives have irrevocably been made different in the moment. And some of us are desperately clutching to recreate as fast as possible what life looked like before. Some of us are terrified to look at what life will look like in the near term. And there's some of us who wonder if we're even going to make it through XYZ at all. And what so much of this conversation sparks for me is the opening text of the film said fear and anxiety grew rampant everywhere. And then they cited, I didn't write it down, so I'm probably not quoting it verbatim, but they cited later in the film that, you know, when the wind blows, like it blows where there is fear and anxiety growing, and that wind blowing, coming in. And so I feel like so much of what we're speculating on, it's a powerful and beautiful thought. And I don't say this dismissively, I say it affirmingly. It's a powerful, beautiful thought. What does it mean for us to ask forgiveness of creation? And what does it mean to enter into that conversation humbly, and enter into that conversation without intention to scar, but with intention to restore and with intention to heal? You know, what does that look like? And these places and these spaces. I mean, the missile, I don't think it's insignificant. Like, the missile came through the roof, and the final image of this film, which, as we've speculated about before, is an idea of, like, you can kind of perceive that the last moment of the film is kind of what the film, in most cases, wants you to think about. That's what it wants you to leave thinking about. And the final moment of this, it shows that the head of the doll is still on the stairs, and the precious book that was gifted from her mother, the symbol of her hopes and dreams for medical school, is laying there, pages fluttering in the wind, all under the shadow of I didn't mean to do that. Under the shadow of this
You're that good.
of this hole in the ceiling,
Sure.
a place where something happened, of this scar to the building that has been wrought down and has left such devastation in its wake.
But see, I wonder too, I'm sorry to cut you off, but to contextualize a little further there, my comprehension of that was that, and maybe this is ultimately where you're going, so I'm sorry if I cut that off prematurely, but is that it establishes in the mythology of this spirit that it attaches itself to artifacts, personal belongings. And so it's like they're fleeing, and ostensibly
they'll never be free.
Right.
They'll never be free from it. No, so I mean, I wasn't going to make it that succinct. That they will forever be under the shadow of this thing that has taken place. And I feel like those are the ways in which we and I would say this.
Isn't that? I'm sorry, but
no, you're fine.
The point isn't that is, however ill-equipped we may be, I do think we are gifted with the resources to step out of that shadow. You know what I mean? Like, I don't actually think the movie is a nihilistic film on a real dour level, but but that punctuation mark does paint, we will forever be scarred. It's Jill and Nora's gun. It's can we be whole?
Can we be okay?
Jesus saying, do you want to be healed?
Yeah.
There's, because you could ask the question of, well, of course I do, but we continue to exacerbate and to propagate violence and conflict, in the name of exceptionalism.
Because there's so much about that moment that you just cited, the story you just cited, where Jesus encounters the man who had been crippled and was laying by the pool of Bethesda, and Bethsaida, I don't remember. Basically, he's laying by a pool that would periodically be
You're
troubled.
already further than I am, so you're good.
But he would be, the pool would be troubled by the Spirit of God, and whoever was the first person in that pool would be healed of whatever their ailments were. The story in the Bible points out to us that there was a man who had been there for a number of years. The specific amount escapes me, but for a number of years. And when Jesus asks, would you be whole? He says, well, there's nobody to take me. There's nobody to bring me to the pool. So essentially adopting, well, this is how it is. So I can't ever get out of this. This is how it is. And here comes Christ with a complete, that's not the question I asked you.
Right.
I didn't ask you a question of who can carry you to the water so you can be well. I didn't ask you that question. I asked, do you want to be well? Right. So do you want to start looking and thinking at this differently? Do you want to start imagining a different perception for all of these things that you're interacting with and engaging with at this moment? And I think that's the pertinent question to us. Ezekiel asked we cited it earlier. Ezekiel asked the question, God asked the question of Ezekiel. Ezekiel didn't ask. God asked him, can these bones live? And that's the question before it. Do you want to be well? Can these bones live?
Right.
Put the land on notice. Recognize the new has come. The kingdom is at hand. You have what you have at your immediacy, an opportunity to look, think, feel, and walk differently in the world.
Right.
And yet we continue to perpetuate the systems that continue to haunt and scar the land. This is ostensibly our final conversation in this short series about ghost stories. And it should be noted, under the shadow, while I'm convinced a perfect place to stop this series, because we'll be talking about the leftovers next week, but this is not a ghost, like a being who was alive and then now is deceased.
Right.
This is a monstrosity that is wrought from pain and fear and anxiety that has saturated this specific place and is
Right.
haunting this place and is consuming whatever is still there. And if we look at, I mean, your identifier of this place and time, and I know we need to wind down, but this identifier of place and time, all of the dots are connecting. You
Right.
know, the very first film we covered, A Ghost Story, and he's locked to that home. The changeling, he goes back to that house, and the house is trying desperately to communicate, and the spirit within the house is trying desperately to communicate. Stir of Echoes last week, all of these same things about the way that these places are sort of scarred and haunted by these things, and this remnant that I feel the important charge to us is to take a moment and to recognize the trauma and the systems that have scarred. Is this the most appropriate word that I keep coming to? Like what has scarred us, and looking at those scars, not as moments or opportunities where we would further perpetuate wounds in others and in ourselves, but looking at how we can mend them and how we can learn from them and how we can bind them and how we can potentially stop the blows from continuing to happen in ourselves or in other people. And I just keep coming back to, I'm probably going to shut up after this, but I just keep coming back to, I keep coming back to, what does it look like to ask forgiveness of creation? And
because what that question requires, and you know, this meditation on presence keeps coming to me, and this I can't get away from our parasite conversation of own the place. Like, live into this moment and the now, which is, you know, the eternal present. Because what does it look like to ask forgiveness of creation requires the self-awareness to even ask, right? And we can't be self-aware if we're always looking back at nostalgia and calling it God.
Right.
We can't be self-aware if we're always looking at the by and by and saying, I can't wait.
True. Yes.
Those things shred us. And it can't be, we can't be self-aware if we're the man who says, no one will carry me.
Right.
I want to asterisk this by just saying systemic oppression is a real thing. Systemic problems are real things. But what comes to mind is, you know, Jesus being asked about paying taxes. Give to Caesar what is Caesar. It doesn't matter. Like, this is the now. Like, you operate and you live in the world you're in.
And so and I don't think we referenced it in this particular series of conversations, but I've brought up before about the moment with Lazarus and Mary and Martha. And when Martha came to him, Martha said a couple of things to him. She said, first of all, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.
Right.
And then he said to her, your brother will live. And she says, I know eventually he's going to live. So she had faith for the past, nostalgia. Right. She had faith for what could come, no faith for that moment. Right. No, I mean, I am coming forth to bring resurrection and life right now. And I mean now, this moment. And we operate the same way. We have faith for the past. I see what was done. I believe it was real. We have faith for the future. Maybe sometime in the near distant future, if we can rot it, it will come again. Now, the kingdom of heaven is here. Right. It is at hand.
In you.
And it is within you.
Own the place.
Own the place.
Holy shit. I mean, really, like, take that analogy, and I know we're borrowing from Parasite here, but take the analogy to the geography idea, the place, the placeness.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Own the place. Own your place. Own this place, and in that, you will be a good caretaker of it.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
That
be
is
present.
Right. Like, so much of whether it's Parasite or Scripture is about stewardship. It's about ownership. It's about self-awareness. It's about not leaning on nostalgia. It's about recognizing. I mean, they do a good job in Under the Shadow, ultimately, although it got a little, I was unsure for a minute there, of ultimately motivating why the mom wants to stay. Like, it becomes about this solidarity with her daughter.
Right.
But but these are bad choices.
Yeah. Right.
You know,
right.
and I say that simply to acknowledge, like, she's still not operating in self-awareness and wholeness.
Right.
Like,
Yes.
it there's so many times it's hard for me to just be like, what am I feeling? You know, like
Yeah.
not
of
as
course.
in I'm feeling a thing I can't identify, but as in, like, you know, how do I contextualize my place? How do I contextualize my place?
Right.
And it's like, well, I'm not at home over there. I'm not at home over there. Those people are crazy. These people are lazy, whatever. You know, it's like
Yeah.
but that seems like a weird tangent. I'm trying to kind of wrestle down is it's the changeling and change your own mind. It's
Yeah.
okay, I need to be self-aware and present and now, because my family needs that. I need that.
Yes, absolutely.
I
Yeah.
can't. It's are so that I don't become a martyr to protect dead values,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like,
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
anyway, I don't know.
Yeah. No, and yeah, for real. Under the shadow, y'all.
Missile in the roof.
It's a missile in a roof. There's no, from this henceforth, the poop club standard has changed. The grenade in a backpack standard has changed. It's now missile in the roof, because that's where we are. We've said a lot. I actively think it's the moment where we should just sort of leave that conversation and let it linger and digest it some more for another day. So let's pivot over to the fog meter. Why don't you tell everybody what that's about in case they haven't been keeping up?
The fog meter. We measure these films on our homebrewed metric of fear and God. How scary is a thing? How substantive is a thing? On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to give an 11 to Under the Shadow for the fear. No. My only concern, and speak to this, so because I'm tempted to give it like a 9. I mean, I'm tempted to give it a 10, but my only concern is, does the scare factor hold up on repeat viewings? Because if it's mainly,
it's my second time seeing it.
Yeah.
And I was terrified.
You had to change.
I was terrified. Yeah. It was my second time seeing it. I admit that it had been a good distance between it. I'm giving it a 10. I don't know if that pushes you, but
I'll do it. Yeah.
I'm giving it a 10. It's a solid 10 for me on the fear factor, because
I mean, I paced my house for half an hour.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it's ate a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. It's electric. It's absolutely electric. So yeah, solid 10 for me.
What about you for God factor?
So that one's tricky. I think this film has a lot of very strong things on its mind. I think it is a patient film. I think it's a calculated film, and I think it's a remarkably effective film. I'm going to go 9 for God.
My impulse was 8, because I do think I always will give some credit where I just have some ignorance. Like, this is
sure.
So
yeah, of course. Yeah.
In a place.
Yes.
Like its conflict is born of geography.
Yes.
And a geography. But this is also why I love, you know, kind of foreign language stuff, is like, I enjoy, like, okay, this is not my culture or world, so let me kind of dig in and kind of comprehend this. You know, because initially I was like, well, is there not a lot there? But I'm just giving a lot of weight to perception or rather perspective is the word I'm looking for there.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm gonna go 8.
Okay. And that means that we give Under the Shadow, I feel awful. I haven't once cited the director, but I would probably butcher the name if I did that. But
we'll put it in the show notes.
That means that we give Under the Shadow, one of the very few Persian language horror films, a 9.5 out of 10 on the
that is baller.
Yes, that's high. That's really high for the fog meter. So yeah, and I mean, I think this probably goes without saying.
I mean, we give the changeling a 6.
So would you recommend Under the Shadow?
Yeah. Yes. Maybe.
I recommend it. Sure.
I mean, I do, And
Yeah.
it's not qualified in that way of like, just for this demographic. It is qualified in that way of like, oh my God, it is so stressful.
It sneaks up on you.
It's
It
so
does sneak up on
stressful.
you.
Oh my
Yes.
Lord. But
It's
yeah, I
it's
do.
a very affecting film. I highly recommend it. It's really affecting. It'll stick with you. It's powerful. It's a really
I recommended
thought-provoking
it to
film.
my sister and her husband, and I sent them my video.
That's awesome.
A recommendation.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh, that's
we'll make that
awesome.
part of the feed this week.
Yeah, absolutely, we will. So man,
Riri, good
this is
combo,
great.
man.
Yeah, this was a great conversation. I really, I feel kind of energized by just getting to talk through some of these things. And so, ladies and gentlemen, next week we're bringing this little mini series, this broader series of hashtag in the morning, MOURNING, and this smaller sub series of hashtag remnant, focusing on HBO's The Leftovers season 1 and ghost stories. We're bringing it to a close next week with a full conversation about our thoughts, thematic and otherwise, on episodes 9 and 10 of season 1 of HBO's The Leftovers, and of our thoughts on season 1 as a whole. So catch up with that show. Join us for that conversation next week. We will be pivoting after that to 2020, so don't forget to vote. But Nathan, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I really, really appreciate it. And listeners, thank you.
Just as a brief before you do that, you mentioned one call to action, just to reiterate.
Oh,
vote,
yes.
Give us your email. We'll give you a sticker.
Yes.
Book Club, Lovecraft
Book Club's
Country.
coming. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what you're watching, audience folk, it's your
Give us
turn.
your watchings. Yep, absolutely. Yes, all of that, please engage with us. As always, listeners, thank you as well for sticking along for this ride. And as we say on every episode, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And in that spirit, we encourage you to fear nothing else and be on your way rejoicing. We'll see you next week, everybody.
See you guys.
Bye. Sometimes I know.
Sometimes I know.
I don't know what that is.
Well, Sometimes I Run, the Britney Spears song.
Oh.
You know that old Britney song.
I don't know much Britney Spears.
Just hit me, Lucky, one more time.
I don't know much Britney Spears.
This is so scary. Oh my God. Oh my God.